Hi all. Here to do the next 10 movies from my top 100 movies. Yeah. All right, so this is going to be numbers 40 to 31. Um, Number 40 is a French film called Leane. It's basically a story about um, a group of people who are sort of on the edges of Paris in, what's not your typical image of Paris. It's a the area is more working class. There's some racial violence. There's tension with the police. And overall, this is just, I thought, a really really great story, great film. It's just obviously not something that I see a lot of. I've been seeing more and more French films kind of dealing with the sort of like edges of the city and some of the conflict that goes on there, with the police and with sort of like Paris as a whole. The idea of Paris versus like where the people are actually living. But this was a really great film that I just kind of stumbled across, and I thought it was just really intense and an interesting film. So definitely recommend that. The next one is The Neverending Story, which is a pretty classic movie. One of the things I really like about this, I loved it when I was a kid, and then rewatching it as an adult, you realize that there's so much more to this movie. It was sad as a kid, but as a kid, I thought of it as just kind of a fantasy story, and it is, but it's also a story about grief. It's about, depression, dealing with, life issues in sort of a fantasy way. So I think it's a great movie because I think for kids, it's helpful to kind of deal with certain things that maybe they may be facing, but they do it in sort of a safe fantasy world. And then as an adult, you get to kind of see that metaphor there and kind of what the story's doing on that end. So still very, very heartbreaking movie, but definitely one of my favorites of all time, obviously. The next one is She's the Man. And yes, this is a silly movie, but Twelfth Night is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. And this does an exceptional job of making Twelfth Night, sort of modernizing it. Obviously, it's not in the Shakespearean language, but there are sort of little hints to Shakespeare, to some of the lines. Obviously, the characters are all the same. It's set in Illyria still. And they do a really good job of, dealing with this plot, which is kind of absurd in a way that is still feasible in today's kind of society, but also makes, it deals with the biggest, conflicts within the play, which is particularly the love triangle. Olivia's in love with Sebastian, but Sebastian isn't Sebastian. Sebastian is actually Viola dressed as Sebastian. And as Viola, she's in love with the Duke, but she can't tell the Duke because he thinks she's Sebastian. And he is in love with Olivia, and so it's a whole thing. But they do such a great job of it. And even though it is like a silly teen movie, if you like Twelfth Night, I mean, it's a really great adaptation of Twelfth Night. The next one is The Others, and this is kind of like a traditional gothic horror movie. But this one, I loved the movie to begin with. The setting's really good. The acting's good. The story's just creepy. It has like the right mood. It's not scary as much as it's just got like a nice creepy mood to it. But the ending is like really surprising and very, very good. And so I was a big fan of this one. The next one is Trainspotting, which has been one of my favorite movies since the first time I saw it. Always just really loved this story about obviously some kind of troubled group of people dealing with heroin addiction, trying to get off of heroin, trying to go clean in Scotland in the 90s. Ewan McGregor is in it. It's just everything about this movie is great. It's well acted, well written, well directed. It's just, everything is perfect in this movie. I love it. There was actually a sequel, which I was kind of like iffy on, but I actually thought was very, very good. So sad. Like, Trainspotting is kind of darkly funny. The sequel was pretty depressing. I thought it was authentic to like the story, but it was just very, very sad. The next one is Midnight in Paris, and I know it's Woody Allen, and I definitely have some, sort of issues with Woody Allen. I don't necessarily seek out his movies anymore, although I will admit that the ones I have seen I've liked, but I do feel a little weird giving him money. But this was just a hard one for me to like not see, and I have to admit I still love the movie. It's a story about a writer who kind of is struggling with his writing, and he goes to Paris, and then he finds this way to like travel back in time to 1920s Paris when all the famous artists and writers live there. And it's a really great it's just fun if you love that era and you love those writers and stuff. The guy, both Hemingway and Dolly are just amazing. They're a lot of fun. But I think it has a point as well. And it's very sweet, but it also has, I think, a point about, getting too wrapped up in nostalgia and not kind of living your own life and not finding your own path. So really, really love this movie. Next one is by one of my favorite directors. This is Days of Heaven. Director was Terrence Malick, and everything he does is just so visually compelling, and like he can tell stories with images in a way that very few. I mean, obviously that's kind of the goal with film, but it's just he manages to tell so much of a story through the camera and through the directing, and it's just stunning. Very sad movie, very it really deals with kind of like your perception of things as you get older, the things you remember and what you realize about the things you remember, and just absolutely stunning film. All right, so I think 33 is The Sixth Sense. I mean, I'm not going to spoil it because, even though I think like almost everybody kind of knows the ending now, but this one definitely still tricked me. I mean, I saw it in the theater the weekend it came out, so, no one was really like talking about it yet, but, it's funny because it's one of those movies that there were so many hints to like the ending, and then I would just kind of excuse them, or it'd be like, well, I guess this, and I was trying to, or I would just be like, oh, it must be bad writing, and then, it all really, you were just like, oh, how did I miss that? But what I liked about The Sixth Sense is it was like a really good mix of like creepy and unsettling, but also actually pretty sad. When you really got down to like the actual story here, like it wasn't just a horror movie. It had a lot of like emotional depth to it. So yeah, I still love The Sixth Sense. I'm not like a huge, M. Night Shyamalan. I really think it's like one of his first ones. I'm not a huge fan. Like, I mean, he's fine. But I think this one just really, really worked. Second to last is a film that came out a few years ago. This is called You Were Never Really Here. And it's just a really dark movie about this kind of lonely sort of, I don't know if, I guess he's like an assassin kind of, or a contract killer, really violent killer, doesn't really have a lot in his life, kind of lonely. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Taxi Driver, where he's very much an anti-hero. but he ends up finding out about essentially this sex trafficking ring, and yeah, so he gets involved in that, and it's pretty brutal, but it's pretty impactful. This is like a female director that I just feel like female directors haven't been getting obviously the credit they should in Hollywood, and this is one that was one of my favorite movies the year it came out, and I don't think it got any talk at like Oscar time and stuff, and I was kind of like, oh, come on. And another example where I feel like if like Martin Scorsese had made it, somebody would be like, oh, it's amazing, even though like I don't know that it would have been as good, but it is what it is. And then the last one on this one is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And the thing with this movie is like, yes, it's dumb, it's like obnoxious, but it's really fun, and it actually like does a really good job of like, I mean, obviously it's not giving you a ton of depth on history, but I remember seeing this when I was really young and like picking up like little historical tidbits, and then as I got older, like kind of being interested in some of those historical things because of this movie. And so it's kind of like a fun educational movie, and I feel like it like tricked people into learning stuff, where like you thought you were watching just like some dumb movie about a bunch of slackers, and like you ended up like learning things. So I think it's a lot of fun. Still holds up, I mean, some things don't, but for the age of this movie, definitely in comparison to like, especially the comedy, like for, the age of the movie, some of the stuff doesn't really work anymore, but a lot of it still does. And I still find that impressive when, you're relying so much on like kind of tropey characters of an era. And so, yeah, some of it's dated, but some of it still works. So that's 40 to 31, and then I'll be back with the last 3 in the coming weeks or months or so. And yeah. All right, check some of these out if you haven't seen them, especially like anything by Terrence Malick. I always highly recommend him, and You Were Never Really Here's. Again, I like a lot of really dark movies, so I'm just gonna, I think almost everything, unless it's like a kid's movie, almost everything I like. If it's not, PG, maybe even, maybe some of the PG-13, but anything that's like R is probably going to be very dark, in some way. So there's probably content warnings. So, pay attention to those, before you check anything out. But I will say I don't like a lot of movies with like animal violence. So, usually if like there's something really significant there, but, a lot of things do deal with some pretty intense themes. So, all right. See you around. Bye.